Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight, you're not heading back to the trenches, but to a Europe still shaped by them. The war is over, the bugles have fallen silent, and the newspapers are full of bright headlines about peace and prosperity. Just not for you. You've come home with an injury that never quite healed. The streets are crowded, the cafes are noisy, and the world seems in a hurry to forget. In the early 1920s, there's no shortage of advice for men like you. Take a walk, get fresh air, try to sleep. And when none of that works, there's something new from the chemist's shelf. A small vial or packet prescribed with a smile that promises rest. They don't tell you how much you'll come to need it. Before we put that first dose in your hand and watch the city fade at the edges, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you'd prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you listen to these in bed, consider using a pair of wireless sleep earbuds for enhanced immersion. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed for side sleepers. I've linked my favourite pair in the description. Now, lie back, get comfortable. Let's begin. You step off the train into a city you used to know, though the familiarity feels strangely academic now, as if you've studied it in photographs rather than lived here. The station's high roof is smudged with coal dust, the iron girders streaked with old soot, and the air carries the mingled scent of steam, damp wool, and the faint tang of oil from the machinery that never really rests. Porters in worn caps weave between the passengers, their barrows piled with suitcases, parcels, and the odd wooden trunk marked with names that might never be claimed. The weight of your kit bag pulls at your right shoulder, sending a dull ache down your back. The same one you've carried since the shell fragment was dug out in a field hospital years ago. Outside the arched doors, the streets are wet from a recent rain, the paving stones reflecting the grey sky above, each puddle shivering when a motor car rattles past. You've imagined this moment more times than you care to admit. The moment you came home, left the war behind, and walked once more among people not dressed in khaki, but it is already clear that you've come back to a place that does not quite exist anymore. The first thing you notice is the quiet absence of certain faces. They are not here to meet you on the platform, nor are they anywhere in the crowd. Some you know for certain will not return, their names already carved into fresh stone in the churchyard, or listed on the bronze plaques bolted to civic buildings. Others simply disappeared into the cracks of peace, moved away, married, found work elsewhere, or in some cases taken to avoiding former comrades entirely. The war has scattered people, like leaves in wind, and you realise there is no regathering them. What remains in their place are strangers with hurried steps, their eyes skimming past yours, too polite or too cautious to stare at the way you walk or at the old service tunic you still wear, because you haven't yet replaced it. A few men pass you on crutches, their trousers pinned where a leg should be, while others stand outside shop fronts with tin cups at their feet, eyes downcast, their uniforms patched and fraying at the seams. These are the ones who couldn't fit themselves back into the clockwork of civilian life. And for the first time, you suspect you might be one of them. You walk through streets that should be reassuring in their ordinariness, the rows of brick terraces, the chimneys, the public houses with their frosted windows. But every corner seems touched by the war. Posters still cling to walls in faded strips, urging men to enlist or civilians to buy bonds. The painted lettering is peeling now, the bright colours dull to the colour of dust, but the slogans remain legible if you care to look. In shop windows, mannequins wear suits cut from cloth far finer than anything you've had in years, and their faces, blank and serene, seem almost smug in their detachment from the grit and cold outside. You think of the shops in towns you passed through during the war, their fronts blasted in, the mannequins half buried in rubble, and the memory sits like a stone in your chest. Peace, it seems, hasn't removed the contrast between those who have and those who have not. It has only sharpened it. By the time you reach the street where you'll be staying, the afternoon has already begun to lean toward evening. You've chosen a boarding house because it's cheaper than a hotel and less lonely than a rented flat, at least in theory. The building is narrow, squeezed between a green grocer's with a slanted awning and a small shop that smells faintly of turpentine. Its door is painted a weary green, the brass knocker tarnished to a dull brown. Inside, the hallway is dim, lit by a single wall lamp that flickers when the wind pushes against the windows. The landlady, a woman of indeterminate age with arms like broom handles, shows you to your room without ceremony. She points out the shared washroom down the hall, mentions the rules about visitors, and tells you when breakfast is served. Her voice is brisk, efficient, the same tone used for every tenant, and you suspect that if you collapsed on the floor, she would step around you to dust the skirting boards. Your room is small but not uncomfortable. A narrow bed against one wall, a chest of drawers with a cracked mirror on top, a table just big enough for a chair, and a lamp. The wallpaper is patterned with faded vines and the occasional water stain. The floorboards creak when you cross them. There is no fire in the grate. Coal costs more now than it did before the war, and the landlady is careful with her supply. But you've known colder nights in worse places. The climb up the narrow staircase made the pain flare again, a steady line of heat along your spine that only eases once you set your kit bag down. You stand for a moment in the middle of the room, listening to the muffled sound of voices from the street below, the hiss of a passing tram, the uneven ticking of the clock in the hall. It is, you remind yourself, a place to sleep, a place to start again. Sleep, however, is not a thing you've been able to summon on command in years. The war taught your body to stay alert to every sound, every shift in the air, every flicker of movement at the edge of sight. Even here, with no gunfire, no shouting orders, no sudden concussion of shells, you find yourself half waiting for something to happen. You unpack slowly, folding shirts into the drawer, placing your shaving kit on the washstand. That night, you take a walk after the lamps are lit. The city is busier after dark, the cafes and public houses glowing with yellow light, the windows hazed with steam from kitchens and the breath of patrons. In one doorway, a man plays a violin, the notes curling through the air like smoke. Across the street, a group of young women in cloche hats laugh as they pass, the click of their heels sharp against the pavement. You feel both part of it and apart from it, like an extra in a scene meant for someone else's story. The people here are living in a present tense you can't quite manage. Your mind still circles back to fields, to mud, to the slow minutes between bombardments. The war has loosened its grip on the world, but it has not yet loosened its grip on you. When you return to the boarding house, the hallway is quiet. A smell of boiled cabbage lingers from supper, clinging to the wallpaper. Upstairs, a door slams, followed by the sound of boots being kicked off, but otherwise the building might be empty. You wash up in the shared room down the hall, the cold water shocking against your skin, and make your way back to your own. Outside, a tram clatters past, its bell a brief, bright interruption in the night. You undress slowly, folding your clothes into a neat pile on the chair, and sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, elbows on your knees, head bowed. The mattress dips under your weight as you lie back, staring up at the ceiling. The plaster has a fine crack running from the corner to the centre, branching like a river on a map. You follow it with your eyes again and again, as though tracing its route might tell you where you are meant to go next. The bed is quiet beneath you, the pillow thin but serviceable, the blankets heavy enough to keep out the draught from the window. Yet sleep will not come. The body is still, but the mind refuses to rest, tugging you toward places and moments you thought you'd left behind. Somewhere in the building, a clock chimes the hour, the sound soft and distant, marking the slow passage of a night that will be long before it is over. The night passes in fragments, each hour strung with stretches of half-sleep and abrupt awakenings. By the time the first thin light seeps between the curtains, your eyes feel gritty and your limbs heavy. The pain in your back has spread into your legs, a dull, deep pressure that kept you shifting in bed all night. It isn't sharp enough to double you over, but it gnaws steadily at the edges of your patience, and you know from experience it won't pass on its own. You dress slowly, pulling on the same trousers and jacket you wore yesterday, and descend the stairs to find the boarding house quiet except for the faint clink of crockery from the kitchen. The landlady nods at you without much warmth when you pass, already busy with the business of boiling water for tea. Outside, the air is damp, and the clouds hang low enough to make the city seem smaller. You have nowhere in particular to go, but your body is telling you something different, that the pain will not politely wait its turn to be ignored. The decision to see a doctor is not made out of sudden urgency, so much as a weary concession. You have endured worse, weeks in field hospitals, where the smell of disinfectant barely masked the stink of blood and infection, where the groans of the wounded carried through the night. But those were different times when there was no alternative, when discomfort was simply part of the uniform. Now in peacetime, there are expectations. People talk about getting on as though it were a skill you could master with enough determination, but no one seems to acknowledge that the body has its own say in the matter. You find a surgery not far from the station, its brass plaque dulled by rain, the name etched in neat serif letters. A doctor who has likely been here since before the war, serving the same patient list with the same prescriptions. The waiting room is small and dim, lined with wooden chairs polished by years of use. A coal fire snaps faintly in the grate, giving off more smoke than heat. Two women sit near the window, one with a bundled child asleep against her shoulder. The other stares out at the street, her gloved hands folded tightly in her lap. A clock ticks somewhere out of sight, slow and deliberate. When your turn comes, the doctor ushers you in with a brief nod. He's a man in his 50s, perhaps older, his hair gone to iron grey at the temples. His desk is neatly arranged, the inkwell and blotter positioned just so. A small glass jar of boiled sweets within reach of his right hand. He listens without interruption as you describe the trouble, the pain in your back from where a shell fragment once lodged and was removed, the stiffness in your legs after a day's walking, the way sleep comes in snatches chased away by dreams that feel more real than the room around you. He doesn't question whether the pain is genuine. Perhaps the slight slump of your shoulders or the careful way you lower yourself into the chair is evidence enough. Instead, he opens a drawer and produces a small cardboard box, the kind used for tablets. The label is printed in bold black type. The name of the preparation, long and faintly chemical, but one word stands out: heroin. You've heard the term before, in barracks, in hospital wards, whispered by orderlies or mentioned in passing by. Officers who had been dosed for some injury or another. It is, the doctor explains, a recent advancement, a refined, dependable derivative of morphine. Faster acting, more effective, less habit-forming, or so the literature claims. His tone is the careful neutrality of a man repeating the phrasing supplied by the manufacturer. He tells you he can give you a single injection now, just to ease the worst of it, and then prescribe tablets for you to take in the days ahead. The words safe and modern pass his lips as if they were part of the same thought. You agree, not from any particular trust in the method, but from a vague desire to have it over with. He draws the dose into a syringe, the glass barrel catching the thin light from the window. The sight makes your stomach shift, though you've seen far worse in battlefield stations. The prick of the needle is brief, the push of the plunger slow and deliberate. He speaks in a low, steady voice as he works. Though the words themselves slip past you, the warmth begins almost at once, starting in the arm and moving inward as if someone had poured heated water into your veins. It is not the sharp, dizzying rush you half expected. Instead, it is a slow unfurling, a loosening of knots you didn't realize you'd been holding tight. The ache in your back recedes first, fading into something distant and untroubling. The stiffness in your legs follows, the muscles softening, the joints no longer catching when you shift your weight. Even the tension behind your eyes, the tired, clenched feeling that has lived there since the day you stepped off the transport ship, begins to ease. The doctor makes a note in his ledger, then gives you a supply of heroin tablets. He tells you the dosage, the intervals, the signs that might mean you've taken too much. There is no mention of dependency, no warning about the length of use, only a faint reminder to return if the symptoms persist. When you leave the surgery, the street seems brighter, though the clouds have not shifted. The wet pavement gleams underfoot, and the air feels cleaner somehow, as though the rain has washed away more than just the grime. The pain has not merely diminished, it has been replaced by a curious lightness, a sense of your body moving without resistance. Steps that would normally send a twinge through your side now pass without notice. You find yourself walking without thinking about the mechanics of it, without anticipating the next spasm or tightening. The realization is almost disorienting. You have been living inside a shell of discomfort for so long that its absence feels unnatural. You stop in a small cafe on the corner, drawn in by the warmth and the smell of coffee. The tables are close together, their surfaces scratched and worn. The chairs mismatched but sturdy. A woman behind the counter pours coffee from a tall metal pot, the steam curling toward the ceiling. You sit near the window, watching the passers-by. For the first time in recent memory, the movement of the crowd does not set your nerves on edge. The clatter of cups, the scrape of chairs, the murmur of voices, all of it folds into the background without triggering the sense that something is about to happen. It is as if the volume of the world has been turned down to a tolerable level. You drink the coffee slowly, the warmth of it pooling in your chest. Outside, a tram rattles past, trailing a brief haze of smoke. The thought occurs to you that perhaps this, the simple act of sitting in a cafe without pain or unease, is what people mean when they talk about recovery. You imagine walking home, sleeping through the night without waking in a sweat, rising in the morning with limbs that move freely. It feels almost plausible, and the sensation is intoxicating in its own quiet way. When the cup is empty, you linger a moment longer before stepping back into the street. The boarding house looks unchanged when you return, its green-painted door still dull in the fading light. Inside, the hallway smells faintly of coal dust and boiled vegetables, the sounds of supper preparation drifting from the kitchen. You climb the stairs without the usual effort, pausing only when the creak of the floorboards reminds you where you are. In your room, the air is cool but not uncomfortable. The warmth from the injection lingers in your limbs, humming faintly under the skin, and for the next few hours you move without the usual careful calculations that have become second nature. Standing, bending, turning, all those movements you once plotted out like a slow dance to avoid the spike of pain now pass without a second thought. It is almost alarming, the absence of that constant low warning in the back of your mind. But the feeling is too pleasant for you to dwell on the strangeness. You sit for a time by the window, watching the street below. People pass without hurry, the trams rattle by with their usual metallic complaint, and somewhere further down the street, a barrel organ plays a song you half recognise from before the war. The music is faint and a little sour in tone, but it still manages to loosen something in your chest. You think of the years when standing at a window like this would have been impossible, the stiffness setting in after only a few minutes, the nagging pull along your spine, and you find yourself leaning forward without hesitation, elbows braced on the sill, the air cool against your face. But as the afternoon turns toward evening, the borrowed ease begins to thin. The stiffness in your back creeps back into place, like a house guest who stepped outside for a moment and returned without knocking. It isn't immediate, nor is it sharp enough to force you to stop what you're doing, but it grows steadily, settling into the familiar lines of muscle and bone. You shift in the chair, trying to stretch it out, but the relief is fleeting. By the time you've finished the small supper the landlady provides, boiled potatoes, a scrap of meat, a ladle of overcooked cabbage, there's a tightness in your legs again, and a faint pressure in your lower spine that tells you exactly where this is headed. The packet sits on the table where you left it. The doctor's handwriting is neat but brisk, the kind of script that assumes you already understand the instructions. Dosage, intervals, as needed. You turn it over in your hand for a long moment before unfolding it, the paper crackling softly in the quiet room. The tablets inside are small, chalky to the touch, giving off only the faintest medicinal scent. You tip one into your palm and swallow it with a mouthful of cold water from the jug on the washstand, the bitterness lingering briefly at the back of your throat. The change comes slowly, not the instant bloom of warmth from the injection, but a gradual unwinding that works its way outward from the centre of you. The pressure along your spine eases, the muscles in your legs relax, and that tight, watchful feeling in your head fades until the room seems softer somehow, as though the edges of things have been sanded smooth. You undress without wincing at the stretch of fabric across your shoulders, slide between the blankets, and feel your body settle, as though it has been waiting for this exact position all day. Sleep arrives without negotiation. No staring at the ceiling, no restless shifting, no sudden flares of memory breaking through the thin membrane between wakefulness and dream. You sink, and the hours pass in a dark, steady current that carries you all the way to morning without a single break. When you open your eyes, the light is already pressing at the curtains. You lie still for a moment, listening to the muted sound of a tram bell outside, and register the absence before anything else. No pain in your back, no stiffness in your legs, no tension lurking just behind your eyes. It is so unfamiliar that you take a few seconds to trust it. You dress quickly, almost lightly, surprised by the fluidity of your movements. The stairs which only yesterday you climbed with care pass under your feet without any particular thought. The air outside is damp but not unpleasant, the clouds hanging low enough to brush the tops of the taller buildings. You walk without a destination, letting your feet choose the streets. There's an almost idle quality to the way you stop at shop windows. A watchmaker's display with gold cases gleaming under gaslight. A bakery with neat rows of loaves stacked behind the glass. And you realise it's because you're not thinking about how long you can stand before the discomfort begins. By late morning, you've wandered back to that same cafe near the market square. The place smells of coffee and warm milk, the air thick with the soft murmur of conversation. You take a seat near the window, the same habit as always, but now it's simply for the view rather than to keep an eye on who's coming and going. The clatter of cups behind the counter doesn't jar you, nor does the occasional scrape of a chair leg on the floor. It's not exactly that you feel at ease. The war has taken that word and buried it somewhere you can't reach, but the constant sense of readiness is gone, and that absence feels close enough. When you return to the boarding house in the early afternoon, there's a faint pressure beginning to gather in your lower back again. You know from experience that it won't stop there. It will work its way upward into your shoulders and down your legs until each movement is something you measure against the price it will exact. You take another tablet without thinking too much about it, the action already sliding into place as part of the day. The bitterness lingers a little longer this time, though it's soon replaced by the steady spread of comfort you felt the night before. The hours pass quietly. You read a newspaper someone left in the hall, though you can't recall much of what you've read by the time you fold it and set it aside. The room feels comfortably dim as the afternoon light fades, the glow from the lamp on your table just enough to hold back the shadows. Outside, a tram rattles by, its bell a small bright sound in the early evening. You eat, you drink a little tea, and when the stiffness doesn't return before bed, you find yourself tempted to skip the dose. But then you remember how deep the last night's rest was, how complete the absence of interruption, and you see no reason to take the chance. You take the tablet earlier this time, letting it work its way through you before you've even pulled the blankets up. The warmth is not heat exactly, but a loosening, a sense that every joint and muscle is in the right place, moving the right way. Sleep comes even faster, the darkness folding over you like a heavy curtain. The days begin to fold over one another, each one settling into a shape you could almost call routine. You rise later than most of the other tenants. The morning's unhurried because you've already decided you won't leave the room until you've taken your first dose. Sometimes you stretch it out, letting the faint ache build until it tips just far enough to justify the tablet. Other times, you take it before you even open the curtains, enjoying the way it makes the act of standing and dressing feel almost luxurious. The bitter taste no longer makes you grimace. It's simply the first thing you taste most days, like the morning tea others sip downstairs. The walk to the surgery or the chemist has become just another errand. You step inside, give your name, and either collect the small folded packet from behind the counter or wait a short while for the doctor to bring it out himself. There are no questions, no raised eyebrows, no hesitation as the paper changes hands. Heroin is still a legitimate prescription, and you are a respectable patient with a respectable reason. The ease of the exchange makes the whole thing feel orderly, even necessary, as if the world is quietly in agreement that this is the right course. In those early weeks, you still pretend there is a logic to your use, a clear boundary between treatment and indulgence. You tell yourself the morning dose is for the day ahead, the evening dose for rest, and anything in between only for when the pain forces your hand. But the definition of forces shifts gradually. A twinge when you bend to tie your shoes, a hint of pressure in your lower back after a long sit, a restless hour when you should be asleep. All of it now qualifies. The tablets have become an answer to any question your body might ask, whether it is about pain or simply about the mood you want to be in. You start carrying one or two in your coat pocket, tucked into a twist of paper, just in case. At first, you never use them outside your room, convinced they are only there for emergencies. But an afternoon in a crowded street, a cold wind cutting through your coat, a conversation that leaves you unsettled. Any of these can be the moment you step into a quiet doorway, slip the tablet past your lips, and feel the faint relief start to spread. It's not always about easing discomfort anymore. Sometimes it's about smoothing the edges of the day before they catch on you. The rhythm changes again when you begin dosing more than twice a day. It's not an intentional decision. One morning you take the usual tablet after breakfast, and then a few hours later realize the warmth has ebbed sooner than you expected. You tell yourself the cold weather is to blame, or the extra walking you've done, and you take another. The pattern repeats often enough that you stop thinking of it as an exception. Before long, the spaces between doses are just long enough to keep the effect noticeable, never so long that you have to feel the return of the ache in its full force. Your sleep changes too, though you wouldn't call it worse. It's heavier in some ways, less shaped by dreams, but you wake more often in the night to turn over or to sip water, and sometimes you take another tablet then, just to make sure the hours until morning pass without tension. You keep the packet within arm's reach on the bedside table, and there is a small but definite comfort in knowing it's there when you need it. The habit is no longer just about relief, it is about the assurance of relief, the knowledge that you won't have to endure even the start of discomfort if you don't want to. By the second month, the lines between needed and wanted have blurred entirely. You doze before walks, before sitting down to read, before writing letters, before the thought of writing letters. The association between the tablets and comfort is so fixed that sometimes you feel the first stirrings of relief just by unwrapping the paper. On cold mornings, you let the bitterness linger on your tongue, finding in it not just the promise of ease, but the familiarity of something constant in a world that has felt so unpredictable since your return. The moments without it are now the exception rather than the rule. When you delay a dose because you're waiting for a delivery at the boarding house, or because the conversation in a cafe runs long, you feel the absence in small but insistent ways. A faint tightening in your back, a slow return of the vigilance you carry in your shoulders, a little more edge in your thoughts. The contrast makes the return of relief feel all the more valuable, like a reward for having put up with the interval. You start to think of those moments of waiting as unnecessary. Why postpone comfort when you can simply take it? The world outside your room shrinks slightly as the weeks go on. You still walk and still visit the cafes, but you avoid long outings that would require you to carry more than a couple of tablets. Travel feels less appealing, not because of the destinations, but because of the inconvenience of planning doses around the journey. You don't speak of any of this to the doctor, who still writes the prescriptions with the same even hand, or to the chemist, who still folds the paper without question. The arrangement works. There's no reason to alter it. On certain evenings, especially after a day when the cold has made your joints feel stiff and uncooperative, you take a little extra before bed. You tell yourself it's just to guarantee a full night's sleep, but the truth is you've come to enjoy the way the stronger warmth spreads through you, pulling you down into a depth of rest you can't quite reach otherwise. Those nights you fall asleep with the quiet certainty that you will wake without the faintest echo of pain, and that knowledge is almost as pleasant as the sensation itself. It's during one of these evenings, the packet open on the table, the lamplight turning the white paper a soft yellow, that you catch yourself counting what's left. You tell yourself it's just to see if you'll need to visit the chemist tomorrow or the next day, but the thought that follows is less comfortable. You picture the paper lying empty on the table, the next refill delayed by some unexpected closure or absence, and the idea leaves you with a faint unease. You remind yourself that it's still legal, still easy to get, that the doctor has never hesitated, but the image lingers all the same. Later, when you're ready to sleep, you glance at the packet again, just to be certain of its weight and shape. The paper folds are still neat, but you can feel the smaller size of the contents when you lift it. It's enough for now, more than enough until the next errand. Yet the reassurance you expect from that knowledge doesn't quite come. You slide it back into its place on the table and turn down the lamp, the thought of running low trailing you into the dark. It begins as an ordinary morning, the kind you've settled into over the past weeks. The light through the curtains is the flat grey of a winter sky, the air in the room cool enough that you keep the blankets pulled up for a moment before swinging your feet to the floor. You reach for the packet on the table beside the bed, not because the pain is bad, it rarely gets the chance anymore, but because it's how you start the day. The folds of the paper are familiar under your fingers, the small weight inside a quiet reassurance. But when you open it, there's nothing left. You close it again instinctively, as if the act might change what you've just seen. The paper crackles empty. It's not a crisis, not yet. The chemist is only a short walk away, and the last time you checked, there was no trouble in getting more. You dress quickly, pulling on your coat and scarf, and step out into the cold. The streets are still damp from an early frost, the cobblestones slick in places, your breath curling in the air. The short walk feels longer than usual, though you tell yourself it's only the weather slowing you down. When you reach the chemist's shop, The bell over the door gives its usual tired ring, and the air inside smells faintly of camphor and soap. The assistant behind the counter is someone you've seen often enough to recognise. A young man with neat hair and the kind of polite reserve that never tips into friendliness. You give your name, expecting the usual nod and the familiar sight of the small folded packet appearing from behind the counter. Instead, he hesitates. His expression doesn't change much, but there's a pause before he says, "I'm sorry, sir, we've none in stock today." For a moment, you don't quite follow. The words land without meaning, and you wait for him to go on, to explain when it will be ready. He adds, "We expect more in tomorrow's delivery. You can call by then?" His tone is apologetic in the way people are when something is slightly inconvenient, but easily resolved. You nod, say something about returning tomorrow, and leave. It's a simple delay, nothing more. Outside, the air feels colder than when you came in. You tell yourself it's because the chemist was warm, and the change is more noticeable. The walk back to the boarding house is uneventful, though you feel oddly aware of the way your feet meet the ground, of the way the winter wind pushes against your coat. In your room, you sit for a moment, considering whether to go to the surgery instead, but it seems unnecessary. The chemist will have the supply tomorrow, and there's no point in making the trip across the city just for one day's worth. The hours pass with a faint but persistent restlessness. You make tea, but the taste is dull. You pick up the newspaper from the hall table, but the words blur after a few paragraphs. Your thoughts wander toward the empty packet, toward the quiet satisfaction of unwrapping it, tipping the tablet into your hand and swallowing it down. You tell yourself this is only habit, nothing more. You've gone without before in the early days, when you were taking it only at night, or only when the pain was bad. It's not as though the discomfort is unbearable. By mid-afternoon, you notice your hands are cooler than usual, though the fire in the grate is giving off enough heat to make the air in the room almost stuffy. You roll your shoulders, stretch your legs, but the movement doesn't quite settle you. There's a faint sheen of sweat along the back of your neck, which you blame on the heavy coat you wore that morning. You open the window a crack to let in the cold air, then close it again almost immediately when the draft cuts through the room. Evening comes, and with it a sharper edge to the stiffness in your back. It's not the deep, grinding ache you remember from before, but it's enough to make you shift in your chair every few minutes. The sound of the tram outside feels louder, the lamp's hiss more noticeable, the scratch of your pen across paper, somehow too rough. You abandon the letter you were trying to write, fold the paper into the drawer, and tell yourself that tomorrow will be different. That night, sleep comes more slowly. You turn over once, then again, looking for the position that will ease the tightness in your lower spine. It's not pain, not exactly. More the memory of pain, the anticipation of it. But it keeps you from settling. You close your eyes and try to focus on the sound of the clock down the hall, on the faint rumble of a cart moving along the street. At some point, you drift off, though the rest is shallow and easily broken. When you wake, the first thought is of the chemist. You dress without lingering, the air in the room's still carrying the chill of the night. The streets are busier this morning, the clatter of hooves on the cobbles mixing with the hiss of tyres from passing motor cars. You make your way to the shop, your pace just short of hurried, telling yourself that it's only to avoid the morning crowd. The bell over the door rings again, and the same assistant looks up from the ledger. This time, there's no hesitation. He disappears into the back and returns with a small folded packet, the weight of it fitting neatly into your palm. You thank him, perhaps more warmly than usual, and step back into the street. The cold is sharper today, but it doesn't seem to reach you in the same way. You walk quickly, the packet a quiet promise in your pocket. In your room, you set it on the table, unfold it, and tip a tablet into your hand. The bitterness is familiar, almost welcome. and you swallow it with a mouthful of water from the jug. The change is not immediate, but it comes quickly enough. The slow spread of warmth, the loosening of muscles, the easing of that watchful tension behind your eyes. The stiffness retreats, replaced by that quiet, steady comfort that makes the room seem softer, the day less intrusive. The restless energy of yesterday is gone. The sweat, the fidgeting, the dull ache already fading into something you can barely recall. You lean back in the chair, the empty teacup still on the table beside you, and let the relief settle in, thinking only that tomorrow will be ordinary again. For a while after that one-day shortage, things return to their familiar rhythm. The chemist has your packet ready on time, the doctor writes the prescription without hesitation, and you go about your days with the steady reassurance that what you need is never far from reach. Unfortunately, the rhythm doesn't last. It's in the middle of winter when you first notice a change. The chemist is slower to fill the order, his assistant's expression less perfunctory than usual. You're told there's been a delay in supply, something about paperwork, something about new requirements from the authorities. It's all said in a tone meant to reassure you that the inconvenience will be minor, temporary. Still, the words make you shift slightly on your feet. You accept a smaller amount than usual and leave, telling yourself it will last until the next visit. The next week, the same thing happens. A smaller packet, a mention of deliveries being less regular. The assistant avoids meeting your eyes as he wraps the paper, and you wonder if it's because he's tired of repeating himself or because there's something he isn't saying. At the surgery, the doctor seems brisker than usual. He still writes the prescription, but his questions about your pain are more pointed. He asks how often you take the tablets, whether you've considered spacing them out, whether the original injury still troubles you as much as before. You give answers that are truthful enough, without inviting further comment, but you leave with the uneasy sense that his willingness might not be limitless. One grey afternoon, you're sitting in your usual corner of the cafe, a thin trail of steam curling up from the coffee cup in front of you, when a man you haven't seen in years pauses at your table. You know him from the war, not a close friend, but a face from the same muddy stretch of earth, someone you traded cigarettes with during lulls in the shelling. His coat is frayed at the cuffs, his cheeks windburnt, but his eyes are alert in a way that makes you think he's doing better than most. You talk for a while about nothing important, the weather, the rising cost of food, the way the city has changed since the armistice. At some point, the conversation turns, almost naturally, to the subject of injuries and what's left of them. You mention carefully that the doctor has been less generous lately. He leans in slightly, lowering his voice in that conspiratorial way soldiers sometimes use, and says he knows a place where such things can be found without the trouble of a prescription. It's nothing shady, he insists, just a back room above a tobacconist, a man who keeps supplies for people who have trouble with the usual channels. You don't agree to anything immediately. The idea of going anywhere other than the chemist or the surgery feels unnecessary, even a little improper, but a few days later, when the packet from the chemist is smaller again, and the assistant's explanation is more vague than usual, the conversation in the cafe comes back to you. You keep the idea at the edge of your thoughts for the rest of the day, telling yourself you're only considering it as a precaution, a way to avoid another gap. The following week you find yourself walking toward a part of the city you don't usually visit. The streets here are narrower, the shop fronts older, their signs faded from years of weather. You pass the tobacconist twice before you recognise it, a narrow doorway with a bell that doesn't ring when you step inside. The shop smells of tobacco and something faintly medicinal. The man behind the counter is in his 50s, perhaps older, his hair thinning, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looks up, takes in your coat, your stance, the way you hesitate, and then nods toward a door at the back. The room beyond is small and dimly lit, the air warmer than the shop, carrying the scent of dust and something sharper, chemical. There's a table against one wall, its surface bare except for a small set of scales and a tin box. The man who runs it is younger than you expected, clean-shaven, with a practiced ease in his movements. He doesn't ask your name, doesn't comment on your presence, only asks what you're looking for. You tell him plainly, and he opens the tin, measures out a portion of fine white powder. You'll have to snort it rather than take it as a pill, but that's fine. He folds it into a square of brown paper. The price is more than the chemist charges, but not by much. You hand over the coins without hesitation. The exchange is quick, almost perfunctory, as though both of you understand there's no need for conversation beyond the essential. When you leave, the packet feels warm in your pocket, though you know it's only the heat from your hand. You step back into the street, the late afternoon light already dimming, and button your coat against the wind. The walk home feels longer than usual, though not unpleasant. The streets are busy in places, thin in others, the sound of boots on the cobblestones mixing with the distant clatter of a tram. You notice the smell of coal smoke hanging low in the air, the way the gas lamps are just beginning to glow at the corners. The packet in your pocket is a steady weight, its presence a quiet promise that whatever shortages or cautions lie ahead, you won't have to face another gap like the last one. You keep your hand near it as you walk, not out of fear of losing it, but because it's strangely comforting to feel it there, warm against the cold, certain in a way nothing else seems to be. The first time you buy from the tobacconist's back room, you tell yourself it's only to bridge the gap until the chemist's shelves are more dependable again. But the packet he sells you lasts as long as you want it to, and there's a certain ease in knowing you can replenish it without explaining yourself to anyone. You keep going back, not every time, but often enough that the place begins to feel like another stop in the quiet map of your life. The man there still doesn't ask your name, and you don't ask his. The exchange is businesslike, stripped of the false cheer that often greets you at the chemist. It suits you. Soon the packet is never far from reach. At home, it rests on the table beside the lamp. Folded neatly, its brown paper slightly softened at the edges. When you go out, it sits in your coat pocket, tucked in with a twist of paper to keep the corners from wearing through. You no longer wait for pain to tell you when to use it. The day is easier if you take a dose in the morning, smoother still if you follow it with another in the early afternoon. Evenings are better when the warmth is already there before the lamps are lit, before the cold from the windows begins to seep into the room. The hours between doses become something you measure without needing to check a clock. A certain heaviness in your limbs tells you it's been a while. A faint pressure at the base of your skull says it's nearly time. You begin to plan your errands with this in mind, making sure you're home when you'll need the next one, or at least somewhere private enough to prepare it without interruption. If the timing doesn't quite work, you shift the errands. Letters can be posted tomorrow. Groceries can wait. The laundry can be collected another day. When someone invites you for a walk, you find yourself hesitating, not because you don't want the company, but because you picture the hours ahead and see where they don't match your schedule. Even simple outings start to feel like obstacles if they fall too close to when you expect to dose. You learn to refuse politely, with reasons that sound plausible enough. A headache, a prior engagement, work to be done at home. The cafe where you used to spend long afternoons is less appealing now. You still go from time to time, but only if you've dosed recently or know you can leave before the next one is due. The idea of sitting there, restless and watching the clock in your head tick toward the moment when you can finally leave, is enough to make you avoid it altogether. The warmth and ease that follow a dose are something you've begun to think of as your real life, and the intervals between are merely the time you have to get through before you can return to it. You notice the way your thoughts keep looping back to the packet. When you're reading, your mind drifts toward the next time you'll take it. When you're writing, your hand slows as you picture the spoon, the water, the small movements that lead to the moment of relief. Conversations become harder to follow. You nod at the right moments, but find that you've been thinking about how long until you can excuse yourself and be alone. The back room at the tobacconist's has its own rhythm now. You arrive, nod to the man at the counter, step through the narrow door. The younger man inside weighs the powder, folds it into its paper, takes your coins, and hands it over. There's a mutual efficiency in the transaction, an unspoken understanding that neither of you is here for talk. Sometimes you buy more than you need, just to make sure you won't have to come back for a while. Other times you go sooner than necessary, simply to reassure yourself the supply is there. At home, the ritual has become as familiar as washing or eating. You sit at the table, the packet open in front of you, the spoon and the small glass of water already set to hand. The motions are simple, almost graceful from repetition. The moment the dose reaches you, the tension that's been coiling through your shoulders begins to ease. Your breathing slows, the room settles around you, and the sense of being slightly out of step with the world fades. Days without a proper routine feel longer now. If someone calls unexpectedly, a neighbour, a fellow lodger, an old acquaintance, you feel the interruption like a small intrusion, no matter how well-meaning it is. You keep half an ear on the conversation and half on the quiet clock in your mind, measuring how long until you can return to the table, the packet, the spoon. You become adept at drawing visits to a close without seeming abrupt, offering polite excuses that leave you free to slip back into your own space. Your meals shift to fit the same pattern. You eat when it's convenient to the dosing schedule, never just before, sometimes immediately after, when your body's relaxed enough to enjoy the food. There are days when you skip a proper supper because you'd rather sit with the warmth of the dose and a cup of tea, the thought of food feeling unnecessary or even intrusive. The landlady notices you're eating less, but she doesn't comment beyond a passing remark about thinness in the winter months. Letters go unanswered. Invitations pile up on the small table by the bed. You open them, read them, and set them aside without replying, telling yourself you'll answer later when you're in the right frame of mind. The truth is that most require you to be somewhere at a time that would interfere, and the thought of negotiating that feels more trouble than it's worth. You tell yourself it's nothing personal. You still think of the people warmly, but your life has contracted to a shape that doesn't easily accommodate them anymore. It begins as a small suspicion, one you try to ignore at first. You notice it when you wake in the mornings, a faint but undeniable change. The little tablets that once carried you gently into that soft, warm fog no longer have quite the same reach. Same with the powder you get from the tobacconist. You found yourself having to snort more and more. You tell yourself it's nothing, perhaps just a bad batch or your imagination. The first time it happens, you simply take an extra pill and the world rights itself. A week later, you do the same again without hesitation. It feels almost logical. After all, you've been through worse adjustments in your life. This is hardly anything compared to the army's idea of medicine. But the pattern repeats, and each time it takes more to push back the edge. The relief is there, but thinner now, like a blanket that no longer covers your feet. You spend more time counting what's left, less time actually enjoying it. The intervals between doses feel longer, even when the clock says they're the same. The waiting stretches, taut and uncomfortable, as if time itself has slowed down. It's during one of these restless waits that you hear the tobacconist mention, in that casual, almost bored way, that there are other preparations available if one's medicine isn't strong enough. He says it as if remarking on the availability of a stronger brand of tea. He doesn't push, just lets the thought settle. You pretend you haven't heard, but it lingers all the same. When the pills feel like chalk in your mouth for the third time in a fortnight, you bring it up yourself. The tobacconist doesn't even blink. He reaches beneath the counter and produces a hypodermic syringe, a tidy piece of steel and glass, the kind your doctor injected you with when he first introduced you to the stuff. But here, it feels oddly personal, like a tool meant for you alone. He explains the dosage with the same tone he'd use to describe rolling tobacco, and he charges you a price that makes your stomach tighten, but doesn't stop you from paying. Back in your rooms, you set the items out on the table, studying them the way you might once have examined a new piece of kit issued in barracks. A blend of curiosity and quiet acceptance. You tell yourself you're not a fool, you'll be careful. This isn't about chasing more. It's about making the medicine work again. The pills have failed you, and this is simply the next step. You tap a small measure of the powder into the spoon, add a splash of water, and hold it over the flame until it clouds and clears. You draw the warm liquid into the syringe, clean the needle as best you can, following the tobacconist's instructions with a soldier's precision, and when the moment comes, the plunge is almost anticlimactic. The effect is not. The change is immediate, startling. It isn't the creeping warmth of the pills, that slow untying of knots. It's a sudden, clean severing of the rope. The ache in your back vanishes, as though it had been a figment. The restless buzzing in your thoughts cuts off mid-sentence. You sit for several minutes without moving, staring at the wall, trying to decide whether you feel more alive or more absent. In the end, it doesn't matter. The comfort is absolute. From then on, the syringe becomes another part of your room, as ordinary as the lamp or the chair by the window. You keep it wrapped and tucked away, but always in reach. At first, you alternate between pills and injection, telling yourself the vials are for bad days. Those days come more often. You still run errands, still appear in familiar places, but you time your outings carefully. There's no reason to suffer when the solution is sitting literal inches away in your desk drawer. It's about then that you start to notice the social spaces in your life thinning out. Friends don't call as much, though whether they've grown weary of your company or you've simply stopped returning the visits is hard to say. The war already made conversations awkward. You've never been quick to fill silences since you came home. And now there's the added complication of arranging your day around the next dose. Family visits become shorter, tenser. Someone, an aunt perhaps, remarks that you're looking a bit drawn in that tight-lipped way that suggests a criticism wrapped as concern. You shrug it off. It's easier not to linger with people who notice too much. The tobacconist becomes, in a strange way, your most consistent contact. He doesn't ask questions beyond the polite minimum, and his shop isn't too far of a walk from your rooms. You keep your head down, avoid drawing attention to your purchases. The world outside is busy with its own concerns. You've learned how to move through it without snagging on anyone's gaze. When you do see old acquaintances, the encounters feel thin, as though you're speaking through glass. They talk about work, family, the price of things. You nod and smile where appropriate, but you're always aware of the clock in your head, ticking toward the moment you can excuse yourself. The intervals between doses have become the frame around which your life hangs. By now the vials outnumber the pill envelopes on your table. You keep them in a small tin, the kind that once held biscuits. You could hide them, but there's no one to hide them from. The tin feels almost like a comfort object in itself. The faint clink of glass when you move it reassures you that all is in order. You've never been one to leave such things to chance. One damp evening, a friend from before the war, one of the few who still bothers to try, sends word that he's in town and would like to call on you. The note is short, warm enough in tone, but the first thought that flashes in your mind is not of seeing him, but of how the timing clashes with your next dose. You picture the visit, the polite conversation, the effort of keeping your voice steady, the distraction of feeling the minutes crawl. The discomfort of it blooms in your mind until it overshadows any genuine pleasure you might have felt. You send back your regrets, citing a vague ailment. You tell yourself you'll arrange another meeting soon, but you know you won't. The relief of being alone in your rooms, the tin within reach, outweighs whatever companionship might have offered. Later that week, you find yourself sitting alone in a cafe. You've brought a newspaper, though you barely glance at it, the words swimming past without meaning. At the next table, a group of young people are laughing, not the strained, self-conscious laughter of those trying to fill silence, but the unguarded kind that rolls out naturally, spilling over into the air around them. You watch them for a while without really intending to. The sound feels foreign, almost startling. You try to remember the last time you laughed like that, and nothing comes. It's not just that you can't recall the moment, it's that the memory feels as though it would belong to someone else entirely, someone who no longer exists. You look away, folding your paper with deliberate care, and focus instead on the comfort waiting for you back home. The first weeks after you switch to injecting are almost intoxicating in their efficiency. No bitter taste to mask, no awkward measuring of powder into water, no slow wait for the dull glow of pills to take hold. The rush is clean, immediate, and absolute. For a while, you tell yourself this is merely a refinement, the same medicine, just in a form that works better now that your body has grown accustomed to the old way. It doesn't feel like escalation. It feels like pragmatism. You no longer have to sit there wondering if you took enough or too much. The needle delivers certainty, but certainty has its own price, and the first bills come due sooner than you expect. The inside of your elbows grows tender. At first it's a faint soreness you barely notice, brushed away with the same absent-mindedness you might reserve for a bruise from bumping into a table. Then, a week or two later, you find yourself angling your arm awkwardly to avoid the sting as you pull on a coat. The skin grows red, the veins faintly raised, and you start moving the injection sites around. Wrist, forearm, the back of your hand. Each spot a temporary solution, until it, too, protests. You dab at the marks with a cloth dipped in hot water, but they remain faint purplish blooms that seem to linger no matter how carefully you treat them. Your appetite, already unreliable since the war, all but disappears. Meals are more often skipped than eaten, your body tricking you into thinking you're not hungry, when in truth it has simply learned to run on whatever energy the drug provides. The odd times you do sit down to food, it is more an obligation than a pleasure. A slice of bread that turns dry in your mouth, a few mouthfuls of broth that you force yourself to swallow before pushing the bowl away. You tell yourself you'll eat later, but later rarely arrives. On days when you do manage a full meal, the heaviness of it sits in your stomach like ballast, slowing you down, making the next dose feel like the only way to lighten yourself again. Winter deepens, and with it comes a new kind of cold, one that seems to burrow into you rather than press from outside. Coats, once a comfort, now feel oppressive. The weight across your shoulders seems to slow you down, the layers restricting rather than insulating. You find yourself walking faster through the streets, not from urgency, but in the hope of stirring warmth into your limbs. The warmth never quite comes. Gloves slip from your fingers, and you don't bother to retrieve them. Scarves catch in your breath and make you cough. You settle for whatever will keep the wind off your face, and leave the rest to endurance. Your movements become smaller, more economical. Where once you would have taken the long way home to avoid a crowd or to pass a favoured cafe, you now take the most direct route possible, even if it means squeezing past the reek of wet wool and unwashed bodies on a tram. You plan each outing with the precision of a soldier calculating rations. Is the errand worth the walk? Can it wait until you're already outside for something else? If it can't, you weigh it against the time it would take away from your next dose. Often the decision is made for you. The dose wins. The weight falls from you in increments too small to notice day by day, but unmistakable when you catch sight of yourself in a shop window. Your cheeks are hollowed, your collarbones sharper, your hands nobbled and dry. The trousers you've worn for years now need their belt drawn a notch tighter, and even then they hang loosely. You stop looking too closely at your reflection, telling yourself that mirrors are a poor judge of health anyway. Better to focus on the fact that you can still move through the day, still get where you need to go, still keep the routine going. The people who knew you before notice, though they rarely say anything outright. An old neighbour tilts her head and asks if you've been unwell. You tell her it's nothing, the lingering effects of a winter chill. A man you once shared a table with at the cafe now only nods from across the room instead of inviting you to join him. You take it as a kindness rather than a slight, relieved to be spared the effort of conversation. The further you recede, the less anyone expects of you, and the easier it becomes to drift through the city like smoke. On the days between injections, the world feels heavier. It isn't pain, not in the sense you remember from your wounds, but a kind of dense fatigue that sinks into your bones. Stairs, which you once took 2 at a time without thinking, now require you to pause halfway. You make excuses to linger at the bottom of hills, pretending to adjust your scarf or tie a loose lace before continuing. Your body seems to have learned the exact moment when the last dose begins to ebb, and it broadcasts its discontent in every movement. The slump of your shoulders deepens, the angle of your head droops, and even your eyes feel heavier in their sockets. Sometimes the decline announces itself in smaller, stranger ways. You fumble more often, coins slipping through your fingers, cups tipping in your grasp. The simple act of buttoning your shirt in the morning feels like work, your fingertips clumsy and slow. The ache in your arms never truly fades now, whether from the injections or from the constant tension of holding yourself upright against the cold. You find yourself leaning on railings, on walls, on the back of a chair in a shop, anything that will take some of the strain from your legs. When you sit, you stay sitting longer than you need to, reluctant to face the weight of your own body again. The walk home from the tobacconist becomes the longest part of your day. It's not the distance. You've made far longer journeys, but the sense that your legs have turned to something heavier than flesh. The streets blur into one another, their cold sameness broken only by the feel of the packet in your pocket, its faint warmth from your hand, the only thing that reminds you to keep moving. You tell yourself the heaviness will lift once you've used, and sometimes it does for a while. But lately, the relief is briefer, the return of weight more certain. One evening, after a day of errands that should have been simple but instead felt like an unbroken march, you find yourself at the foot of the stairs leading up to your room. The wooden banister gleams faintly in the dim light, a familiar companion after years in the same lodging, but tonight it feels like an adversary. Your legs protest before you've even taken the first step. You grip the rail, the coolness of it seeping into your palm, and begin to climb. Each step feels longer than the last, the muscles in your thighs trembling as if you've been walking for hours. The walls on either side close in, your breath loud in the narrow space, your coat pulling at your shoulders with every upward movement. By the halfway point, you have to stop. You lean into the rail, forehead brushing the wood, and tell yourself it's just fatigue, a bad day perhaps, or the lingering damp of the weather working its way into your joints. You force a long breath through your nose, willing your heart to slow its pounding. The last thing you want is for anyone to see you like this, hunched and breathing hard over a single flight of stairs. You straighten, take another step, then another, counting them in your head as though they are miles in a march. When you reach your door at last, you feel as though you've completed some private trial. Your hand lingers on the latch, not because you doubt you can turn it, but because you want to gather yourself before stepping inside. It's easier to pretend nothing is wrong if you cross the threshold calmly, coat still buttoned, shoes still on. Later, in the quiet, You will unbutton the coat with slow, deliberate motions and set it aside, telling yourself the day was simply longer than most. You will not admit, not yet, that the length of the day has less to do with the clock and more to do with you. It begins without ceremony, a constable stepping out from a doorway as you pass, his hand up in that casual yet unyielding gesture that halts your progress as surely as a wall. The street is busy enough, trams rattling along the tracks, a delivery cart drawn up outside a shop, but in the way that crowds always seem to sense tension, a slight bubble forms around you. He asks for your papers, not in the brusque bark of wartime identity checks, but with a slow and faintly suspicious tone. You hand them over without protest, aware that your fingers feel stiff on the leather fold, that the chill in the air is not entirely to blame for the tremor in your hand. He studies the documents for longer than necessary, glances at your face, then back to the paper. It isn't until he has handed them back, and you have walked half a dozen paces away, that you remember how closely his eyes lingered on the hollows beneath your cheekbones. The first time, you tell yourself it was nothing, a routine check, no reason to dwell. But the second time happens only a week later, and the conversation lasts longer. This officer asks where you're going, where you have been, and what you do for work these days. You answer plainly enough, but you are aware of the gaps, the pauses where you are forced to construct some plausible errand or occupation from air. His gaze lingers on the wear at your cuffs, the fraying of your scarf, and you feel the heat of embarrassment coil under your ribs. When he finally waves you on, the relief is thin and fleeting. You cannot shake the sense that your face has been marked in his mind, stored away in some mental ledger alongside other people whose names he does not need to know to recognize again. Money is the sharper worry. For months you managed. A bit of savings left from your demobilization pay, a cushion from the sale of one or two items you had no real use for. But the habit has a way of stretching beyond the bounds of whatever you can afford, as elastic and unyielding as a tightening noose. Each packet costs more than the last, though you cannot tell whether the price has truly risen or whether you have simply begun to buy more often. The coins in your pocket seem to vanish between one day and the next, leaving you counting and recounting them in the dim light of your room, as though the arithmetic might change if you squint hard enough. The first sacrifice is easy enough. A watch you seldom wore, a gift from an uncle who had never much liked you anyway. The pawn shop is only a few streets away, its windows clouded with a film of dust over displays of violin bows, mismatched silver candlesticks, and pocket knives in cracked leather cases. The man behind the counter appraises the watch in seconds, offers a sum that seems insultingly small, and slides the coins across without looking at you for longer than necessary. You tell yourself it is only temporary, that you will buy it back once you are on steadier footing. You even half believe it as you tuck the money away and step back into the street. Then goes a fountain pen you once prized for its weight and smoothness. It, too, fetches less than you expect. The shopkeeper shrugs as if to say that sentiment has no exchange rate. Your trips to the pawn shop become more frequent, though you tell yourself each time that this will be the last. The medal from your service, not one for particular bravery, just the standard issue, acknowledging your time overseas, is harder to hand over. The clerk examines it with mild interest, then places it in a tray with a handful of similar ones. You try not to notice how quickly it disappears from view. Winter has a way of making the absence of certain things more acute. When you part with your heavier coat, the days have not yet turned bitter, and you imagine you can manage with layers. But the first week of hard frost strips away that illusion. Your breath plumes white in the air as you walk, the wind finding its way through every gap in your clothing. Still, you tell yourself the lighter coat will do, as long as you keep moving. You know, of course, that the money is already gone, dissolved into powders and liquids that vanish into your blood as swiftly as the coins into the pawnbroker's till. The police seem to notice you more as your appearance declines, not always stopping you, but watching. You catch the flick of a gaze as you pass, the subtle turn of a head. Once you're certain a constable begins to follow you for a street or two, his pace matching yours until you duck into a shop and wait behind a display of tobacco jars until he moves on. You wonder whether they know the signs. The lean figure, the drawn face, the restless hands. Perhaps they have seen enough of it in alleys and cheap lodging houses to recognise the shape of it in a passer-by. There comes a morning when you count the coins on your table and find them insufficient, even for the smallest packet. You sit for a long while, head in your hands, thinking through the contents of your room. There is little left that anyone would buy. Your books might fetch a few shillings, but the thought of parting with them sits oddly with you, as if you might need them to prove you're still a certain sort of person. That leaves the suit, your last good one, pressed and kept aside for occasions you no longer attend. Carrying it to the pawn shop is harder than you expect. You fold it carefully, lay it in a brown paper parcel, and tuck it under your arm. It feels heavier than cloth ought to, as if it carries the weight of all the dinners, interviews, and small ceremonies you will never attend in it again. The day is overcast, the sky low, and the air damp. By the time you reach the shop, your fingers are cold through the paper. Inside, the light is yellowed and the air smells faintly of polish and old fabric. The clerk takes the suit without comment, unwrapping it and running his fingers along the seams. He examines the shoulders, the cuffs, the lining, and then offers you a price that is neither generous nor insulting, simply adequate, as though he has no wish to engage in the pretense of haggling. You nod, unable to muster the energy to dispute it. When he counts out the money, he does not meet your eyes, not out of rudeness, but out of a kind of quiet habit, as though avoiding the look of someone who has come to part with the last of their good things is a small courtesy. You take the coins, feeling their cool weight in your palm, and leave the shop without looking back at the suit lying folded on the counter. A few days pass. You stretch what little remains of your supply as far as possible, spacing out each injection until the craving burns hot enough to overtake reason. The money you owe is not small, and your landlady's voice grows shorter each time you pass her in the hall. She doesn't have to say the word eviction. You can hear it in the way she stops asking how you are, in the way her eyes glance over your shoulder, toward your door, as though already measuring the space for someone else. Even the cat that haunts the stairwell no longer winds around your ankles. Perhaps it has learned you have nothing to give. The mornings are worse now. Waking is not waking so much as surfacing through layers of ash. The air in your room feels heavier than before, carrying the faint, sour smell of unwashed fabric and something chemical that clings to the curtains. The streets outside are beginning to warm for spring, but in here the air stays cold, the light dim even at noon. Your body protests every movement, as if joints and muscles have quietly shrunk overnight. Food, when you can get it, tastes flat, unsharpened by hunger. It sits in your stomach like ballast. You think about the bills you can't pay, the people you can't repay, the places you can't go without being noticed. You think about the injections, how they used to lift you, quick and bright, and how now they simply bring you back to something like level. By the fourth day, the arithmetic becomes unavoidable. The coins in your pocket don't add up to another week here, let alone another purchase. Your landlady's patience has never been an endless thing, and you can feel its edges now. She will knock soon, and when she does, there will be no discussion. She will want you gone before the month is out, and she will find someone who can hand over rent without avoiding her gaze. There is no friend left who would front you the cost of another dose, no merchant willing to extend credit. The tobacconist was the last thread, and even he made it clear he was not in the business of charity. That night, you sit on the edge of the bed and take stock of what you have left. The small case with its worn hinges still holds the syringe, the thin-walled glass vial, and the last folds of pale powder wrapped in paper. It is the last of it. You know, in the way you know when a door has closed, that there will be no more after this. The choice isn't whether to take it. The choice is in how much, and whether you will treat it like a measured ration or a final unbroken pour. You think about what's waiting once it's gone. The aches, the fog, the crawling heat in your skin, the dull-eyed days with nothing to quiet them. You picture yourself moving through them, and the picture won't hold. The room is quiet except for the faint tick of the clock on the mantel. Outside, someone passes in the street below, the echo of their boots fading into the night. You lay the case on the blanket and tap the powder into a small metal spoon. From a chipped mug, you take the smallest sip of water and tip it in, holding the spoon over the candle stub until the liquid darkens and the last flecks dissolve. The smell is faint but unmistakable, sharp, chemical, and already pulling at something deep in your chest. You draw the hot, clear brown solution through a bit of cotton to strain out the grit, watching it seep into the barrel of the syringe. The meniscus rises. It would be easy to stop at half, to take only enough to smooth the edges, but your fingers keep turning until it is nearly full. If this is all there is, you want it to be enough to silence every restless corner of your body. You want it to be something you can still feel after the world narrows to a pinprick. The needle finds its place without trouble. The burn is soft at first, almost absent, replaced quickly by a rush that floods the base of your skull and fans outward. You lie back and let the mattress take your weight, staring at the cracked line in the plaster above. The clock ticks on, but it's quieter now, as though the air between you and the sound has thickened. Your chest feels heavy, but not unpleasantly so, more like the warmth of a blanket pulled high on a winter morning. The light from the lamp takes on a slow, honeyed quality, sinking into the fabric of the curtains, into the worn wood of the table, into the shape of your own hands as they rest palm up on the coverlet. Somewhere in that slow brightening, your heartbeat stumbles. It's a small thing at first, an extra space between one pulse and the next, but it widens, drawing your attention inward. You try to swallow, but your throat feels slow to obey. The warmth in your limbs turns heavy, then heavier still, as though the air has turned to sand. You mean to shift your legs, but the thought takes too long to reach them, and by the time it does, they are distant, unresponsive. The edges of the room begin to shade toward grey, the lines of the furniture softening until they no longer quite meet. You notice your breathing, not as a rhythm but as a task, one you must now remember to perform. Each draw of air feels shallower, the return less satisfying. There is a weight pressing down on your ribs, and you cannot tell if it is the blanket or something inside you. The sound of your own pulse is in your ears now, slow and uneven, like a drum with a torn head. You try to lift your hand toward your face, but it slips from your command halfway through and settles back against your side. The clock ticks somewhere in the distance. The taste in your mouth is metallic, and the air feels thick, almost wet. The shapes in the room drift further apart, their colours fading into a pale, unlit blur. You catch one last, small thought, that this is not quite the feeling you expected, that it is quieter and colder, and then even that thought slides away. The ceiling loses its depth, the light folds in on itself, and your eyes stay open, though they no longer see. By the time the landlord manages to get the door open, the room already smells wrong. It is not the fresh tang of soap or the stale residue of last night's cigarettes, but a cloying heaviness that seeps into the hallway as the door swings wide. Someone mutters about leaving the window open, though the sash has been painted shut for years. The bed is still unmade, the blanket tangled where you left it, and the chair by the window is shoved back at an odd angle, as if abandoned mid-use. There is nothing dramatic about the scene, No violent struggle, no toppled furniture, only the unmistakable stillness of something finished. They work quickly because there is no reason to linger. A doctor is summoned, more out of formality than hope, and he writes something vague on the certificate after a glance at your still face and the shallow blue tinge about the lips. Pneumonia will do, or heart failure. Either is safe, uncontroversial, and unlikely to prompt further questions. The truth would only mean a delay, and no one here wants that. Within an hour, a pair of porters arrive with a stretcher, the legs knocking softly against the wall as they negotiate the narrow stair. You are gone from the building before midday, and the landlady is already inquiring which of her current lodgers might want the room for a cousin or a friend. Your belongings do not take long to deal with. A battered suitcase under the bed yields a change of shirt, a pair of fraying socks, and a bundle of letters, too creased and smudged to read without care. The porters leave these where they are, uninterested, while the landlady gathers them into a small box for next of kin, though she cannot say for certain if there is one. The rest is discarded: an empty tin from the chemist's, a chipped mug with a hairline crack down one side, a book missing its cover. The thin mattress is flipped to hide the stain left behind, and someone makes a note to send for a new one when funds allow. By evening, the only trace you were ever there is the faint dent in the pillow and the fact that the rent ledger has been updated to mark the room available. There is no obituary, no small column in the paper, no announcement pinned to a church notice board. You are not the kind of man whose passing shifts the air in a city, and London is full of the unremarkably gone. In the minds of those who knew you, the pawnbroker, the publican who tolerated your quiet presence in the corner, the chemist who counted out your powders, your absence is noted only in passing. A few wonder for a moment, then get on with the day. Life, after all, is expensive, and survival leaves little room for reflection on the fates of others. It is the war that made you, and the war that unmade you, though no one will list your name among its dead. The roll of honour is reserved for those who fell in the field, not for the men who returned breathing, but never whole. There will be no wreath laid for you, no official recognition that your end was seeded in the mud and gas of Flanders. The poison that carried you away did not come in a shell casing, but the damage it found in you was planted years before, in the long nights when sleep would not come without help, and in the days when the silence between heartbeats seemed longer than it should. In the official record, you will be one more entry in a registry, your death noted in ink that will fade as the pages are turned and handled. If anyone should seek you decades from now, they will find only the barest details: name, age, cause, and nothing else. No hint of the small life that unfolded between your discharge and your end. No record of the evenings spent watching rain smear the lamplight on wet cobblestones, or the mornings you woke too late to chase any honest work. The long months of making do, of shaving pennies off meals, and stretching a week's rent into 10 days will vanish with you. The neighbours in the rooms on either side hear the sounds of the removal, the thump of boots, the low scrape of the stretcher, and know what it means. By nightfall, someone else will be carrying a suitcase up those same stairs, unlocking that same door, and discovering the same view from the narrow window. The building will carry on its business, swallowing tenants and spitting them out, never much altered by who passes through. A clerk from the city office might read your name once, scanning the column for errors, and never think of it again. Somewhere, in the padded chambers of government, your existence has already been reduced to a notation in a ledger, just as so many others have been, men who slipped from the ranks of the living, not with a shout but with the soft collapse of those who have been worn through from the inside. You are part of the residue of the Great War, not the decorated, not the mourned, but the invisible contingent whose war did not end when the guns fell silent. No one tells the landlady how you died. She would not have cared beyond ensuring that the room could be relet quickly. The new tenant will find no ghosts here, for ghosts require memory, and your place in this building's history is too slight to hold any shape. By the time he sets down his valise, the smell will have gone, and the air will be ready to take on whatever trace he brings with him. Outside, the street is as it always is, the grocer's boy balancing a crate on his hip, a tram clanging its bell as it rounds the corner, a woman with her headscarf pulled low against the wind. The war is present only in the absence of those who once walked here, and even that absence has thinned with time. New faces have filled the gaps, and the rhythm of the city has folded over itself, leaving no space where you used to be. The sun slips behind a bank of clouds, flattening the light, and the damp settles in again. Somewhere down the block, a man laughs too loudly, and the sound bounces off the brick, untroubled by whatever happened behind that closed door upstairs. The city keeps moving, as it always does, indifferent to the quiet departure of one more of its wounded. In another day or two, no one passing along this pavement will think of you at all. By the week's end, the room will be let again. The new tenant will open the window to let in a draught, oblivious to the fact that you once stood there with the same view, the same air pressing in, and the same weary thoughts. Whatever you carried here, the memory of the trenches, the long chain of days that blurred together afterward, the steady narrowing of the world to one room and a small supply of powder, is gone now. On paper, you will have died of pneumonia or of a heart that simply stopped. In truth, you were claimed by something older, something that began years before, in the churn of mud and fear. You were a casualty of the Great War, though the record will never say so, and your name will never be read aloud in the square on Remembrance Day. You will not be in the photographs, or in the family albums, or in the proud lists kept by regimental museums. The war's shadow lingers in many such absences, in the quiet endings that no one sees fit to mark. Yours is one of them, a life cut short not by a bullet, but by the long reach of a conflict that outlived its battlefields. There will be no speeches, no parades, no medals pinned to chests in your honour, only the slow erasure of your presence from the places you once touched. And so the street outside carries on exactly as it did the day before you left it. The same shop fronts, the same clatter of hooves on stone, the same pale lights sifting through the drizzle. People pass by without pause, their eyes on their own destinations, and the door to the building swings open and shut with the coming and going of other lives. Whatever mark you might have made here is already gone, washed away in the steady tide of the city's days. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. A life that never made the casualty lists, a war that followed home and settled quietly into the body until there was nothing left to give. No medals, no monuments, just a bed emptied, a name written in the wrong column, and a street that kept on breathing without you. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S. and Rich Davis. Sleep well.